Chapter 5 The Rose of Fire. It was during the next 9 days, counting from that Saturday early in June, the first Saturday in June, as I believe, that Rentresant and all the regions about became possessed either by an extraordinary set of hallucinations or by a visitation of great marvels. This is not the place to strike the balance between the two possibilities. The evidence is, no doubt, readily available. The matter is open to systematic investigation. But this may be said. The ordinary man, in the ordinary passages of his life, accepts in the main the evidence of his senses, and is entirely right in doing so. He says that he sees a cow, that he sees a stone wall, and that the cow and the stone wall are there. This is very well for all the practical purposes of life, but I believe that the metaphysicians are by no means so easily satisfied as to the reality of the stone wall and the cow. Perhaps they might allow that both objects are there, in the sense that one's reflection is in a glass. There is an actuality, but is there a reality external to oneself? In any event, it is solidly agreed upon, supposing a real existence, this much is certain. It is not in the least like our conception of it. The ant and the microscope will quickly convince us that we do not see things as they really are, even supposing that we see them at all. If we could see the real cow, she would appear utterly incredible as the things I am to relate. Now, there is nothing that I know much more unconvincing than the stories of the red light on the sea. Several sailors, men on small coasting ships, who were working up or down the channel on that Saturday night, spoke of seeing the red light, and it must be said that there is a very tolerable agreement in their tales. All make the time as between midnight of the Saturday and 1 o'clock on the Sunday morning. 2 of these sailormen are precise as to the time of the apparition. They fix it by elaborate calculations of their own as occurring at 12:20 a.m. And the story? A red light, a burning spark seen far away in the darkness, taken at the first moment of seeing for a signal, and probably an enemy signal. Then it approached at a tremendous speed, and one man said he took it to be the port light of some new kind of Navy motorboat, which was developing a rate hitherto unheard of, 100 or 150 knots an hour. And then, in the third instant of the sight, it was clear that this was no earthly speed. At first, a red spark in the farthest distance, then a rushing lamp, and then, as if in an incredible point of time, it swelled into a vast rose of fire that filled all the sea and all the sky, and hid the stars and possessed the land. I thought the end of the world had come, one of the sailors said. And then, an instant more, and it was gone from them, and 4 of them say there was a red spark on Chapel Head, where the old grey chapel of St. Tylo stands, high above the water in a cleft of the limestone rocks. And thus the sailors, and thus their tales, are incredible. But they are not incredible. I believe that men of the highest eminence in physical science have testified to the occurrence of phenomena every whit as marvelous, to things as absolutely opposed to all natural order as we conceive it, and it may be said that nobody minds them. That sort of thing has always been happening, as my friend remarked to me. But the men, whether or no the fire had ever been without them, there was no doubt that it was now within them, for it burned in their eyes. They were purged as if they had passed through the furnace of the sages, governed with wisdom that the alchemists know. They spoke without much difficulty of what they had seen, or seemed to see, with their eyes, but hardly at all of what their hearts had known, when, for a moment, the glory of the fiery rose had been about them. For some weeks afterwards, they were still, as it were, amazed, almost, I would say, incredulous. If there had been nothing more than the splendid and fiery appearance, showing and vanishing, I do believe that they themselves would have discredited their own senses and denied the truth of their own tales, and one does not dare to say whether they would not have been right. Men like Sir William Crookes and Sir Oliver Lodge are certainly to be heard with respect, and they bear witness to all manner of apparent eversions of laws which we, or most of us, consider far more deeply founded than the ancient hills. They may be justified, but in our hearts we doubt. We cannot wholly believe in inner sincerity that the solid table did rise, without mechanical reason or cause, into the air, and so defy that which we name the law of gravitation. I know what may be said on the other side. I know that there is no true question of law in the case, that the law of gravitation really means just this, that I have never seen a table rising without mechanical aid, or an apple detached from the bough soaring to the skies instead of falling to the ground. The so-called law is just the sum of common observation and nothing more. Yet, I say, in our hearts, we do not believe that the tables rise. Much less do we believe in the rose of fire that for a moment swallowed up the skies and seas and shores of the Welsh coast last June. And the men who saw it would have invented fairy tales to account for it, I say again, if it had not been for that which was within them. They said, all of them, and it was certain now that they spoke the truth, that in the moment of the vision, every pain and ache and malady in their bodies had passed away. One man had been vilely drunk on venomous spirit, procured at Jobson's Hole, down by the Cardiff docks. He was horribly ill. He had crawled up from his bunk for a little fresh air, and in an instant his horrors and his deadly nausea had left him. Another man was almost desperate with the raging, hammering pain of an abscess on a tooth. He says that when the red flame came near, he felt as if a dull, heavy blow had fallen on his jaw, and then the pain was quite gone, and he could scarcely believe that there had been any pain there. And they all bear witness to an extraordinary exaltation of the senses. It is indescribable, this, for they cannot describe it. They are amazed, again. They do not in the least profess to know what happened, but there is no more possibility of shaking their evidence than there is a possibility of shaking the evidence of a man who says that water is wet and fire hot. I felt a bit queer afterwards, said one of them, and I steadied myself by the mast. I can't tell how I felt as I touched it. I didn't know that touching a thing like a mast could be better than a big drink when you're thirsty or a soft pillow when you're sleepy. I heard other instances of this state of things, as I must vaguely call it, since I do not know what else to call it. But I suppose we can all agree that to the man in average health, the average impact of the external world on his senses is a matter of indifference. The average impact, a harsh scream, a bursting of a motor tire, a violent assault on the oral nerves will annoy him, and he may say, "Damn!" Then, on the other hand, the man who is not fit will easily be annoyed and irritated by someone pushing past him in a crowd, by the ringing of a bell, by the sharp closing of a book. But so far as I could judge from the talk of these sailors, the average impact of the external world had become to them a fountain of pleasure. Their nerves were on edge, but an edge to receive exquisite, sensuous impressions. The touch of the rough mast, for example, that was a joy far greater than the joy of fine silk to some luxurious skins. They drank water and stared as if they had been fin gourmet, tasting an amazing wine. The creak and whine of their ship, on its slow way, were as exquisite as the rhythm and song of a Bach fugue to an amateur of music. And then, within, these rough fellows have their quarrels and strifes and variances and envyings, like the rest of us. But that was all over between them that had seen the rosy light. Old enemies shook hands heartily, and roared with laughter as they confessed one to another what fools they had been. "I can't exactly say how it has happened, or what has happened at all," said one. "But if you have all the world and the glory of it, how can you fight over 5 pence? The church of Llantrisant is a typical example of a Welsh parish church before the evil and horrible period of Restoration. This lower world is a palace of lies, and of all foolish lies there is none more insane than a certain vague fable about the medieval Freemasons, a fable which somehow imposed itself upon the cold intellect of Hallam, the historian. The story is, in brief, that throughout the Gothic period, at any rate, the art and craft of church building were executed by wandering guilds of Freemasons, possessed of various secrets of building and adornment, which they employed wherever they went. If this nonsense were true, the Gothic of Cologne would be as the Gothic of Cone, and the Gothic of Arles would be like to the Gothic of Abingdon. It is so grotesquely untrue that almost every county, let alone every country, has its distinctive style in Gothic architecture. Arfan is in the west of Wales. Its churches have marks and features which distinguish it from the churches in the east of Wales. The Llantrisant church has that primitive division between nave and chancel which only very foolish people decline to recognize as equivalent to the Oriental iconostasis, and as the origin of the Western rood screen. A solid wall divided the church into two portions. In the center was a narrow opening with a rounded arch, through which those who sat towards the middle of the church could see the small red-carpeted altar and the three roughly shaped lancet windows above it. The reading pew was on the outer side of this wall of partition, and here the rector did his service, the choir being grouped in seats about him. On the inner side were the pews of certain privileged houses of the town and district. On the Sunday morning the people were all in their accustomed places, not without a certain exultation in their eyes, not without a certain expectation of they knew not what. The bells stopped ringing. The rector, in his old-fashioned ample surplice, entered the reading desk and gave out the hymn, "My God, and is thy table spread?" And as the singing began, all the people who were in the pews within the wall came out of them and streamed through the archway into the nave. They took what places they could find up and down the church, and the rest of the congregation looked at them in amazement. Nobody knew what had happened. Those whose seats were next to the aisle tried to peer into the chancel to see what had happened or what was going on there. But somehow the light flamed so brightly from the windows above the altar, those being the only windows in the chancel, one small lancet in the south wall excepted, that no one could see anything at all. It was as if a veil of gold, adorned with jewels, was hanging there, one man said, and indeed there are a few odds and scraps of old painted glass left in the eastern lancets. But there were few in the church who did not hear now and again voices speaking beyond the veil.